Hey everybody, Ketwolski here, checking in with another one of our hashtag Star Trek discussion videos. Today we're going to be talking about Star Trek Nemesis, and we're going to be talking a little bit about not necessarily how the film was the best Star Trek film ever, but why I feel Star Trek Nemesis is actually one of the most important films inside of the Star Trek universe. Now, of course, we're going to be talking a little bit about spoilers, so if you guys actually haven't seen the film, I know it's been out for a while, please go ahead and click away from this video and check out one of the other videos on my channel. I'll give you guys a few moments to go ahead and do that before we jump right into this particular discussion. Okay, so I know a lot of people feel that Star Trek Nemesis was the unofficial low point for the Star Trek franchise. Indeed, that was actually reflective in the box office results of Star Trek Nemesis, only making around $67 million, which is actually the lowest grossing film worldwide for any Star Trek film to date. And during this time period, we actually were losing. Enterprise was getting canceled, TNG had been off the air for a while, Voyager had been off the air for a while, and DS9 had been off the air for a while. So fan interest in Star Trek was starting to dwindle, and they pumped out this supposedly dark and scary film that really wasn't the best. And I'm not here to talk about how necessary the film itself was a failure. I am just here to talk about why I think that out of all the films you see on this list here, Star Trek Nemesis is actually the most impactful for the entire Star Trek universe. So to begin that discussion, we're actually going to go ahead and break down what I think are the biggest plot threads that affect the entire Star Trek mythos as a whole, and why nothing else compares to it on this list of films. So to begin, first, obviously, is we see the death of Data. Lieutenant Commander Data, who's been a beloved character from everyone since he debuted back in 1988 on Star Trek TNG. Everyone's loved Data. Everyone's enjoyed Brent Spiner's performance of him. But in this film, we actually see Data sacrifice himself to save Captain Picard and the crew of the Enterprise. And if that's not impactful to the crew and to us as fans, then that's probably the most impactful thing I could possibly think of that could actually happen inside of a film, that we actually get to see on screen. So that is one of the biggest things that actually affects Star Trek. And the next thing we get to find out is actually that Dr. Soong created additional copies of Data prior to actually making Data. Now, we know a lot about lore, and we've actually seen him in a lot of different great two-parters in TNG, and we've seen what happens to him in the show and stuff like that. But the fact that we meet B4, which is kind of a fun little title there for his name, before Data, obviously. But the fact that we get to meet him reminds us again that Data has a strong backstory, reminds us of lore, reminds us of what happened with that situation. It reminds us of the fact that there could be other Datas out there looming around that we could actually be not have met yet, that we actually have the opportunity to still meet within the Star Trek universe. So being able to meet Data's lost long brother, and what that has the effects of that, which is obviously Data downloads his memories into B4 and then later becomes Data himself. That's kind of an extended universe thing inside of Star Trek Online, which is hugely impactful. Basically, without B4, we would have no more Commander Data / Captain Data that actually would continue to live in the Star Trek universe. So that's really important as well. Another thing we actually get to see is the heart and interworkings of the Romulan Senate. Now, our interactions with the Romulans up until this point has been very limited to a few very close skirmishes and a few subterfuge plots and a few torture plots and stuff like that. We did spend a little bit of time on Romulus in TNG when Picard actually went undercover to retrieve Ambassador Spock, who was working there to try to help with the reunification effort between Romulans and Vulcans, but we didn't get a chance to see too much of the inner political workings of what the Romulan Senate actually looks like. And in this film, we actually get to see not only the Senate chambers, but we see all the different senators that are there, and understand a little bit more about the political structure, about how the military arm is a little bit different than the political arm. We actually get to learn quite a bit more about the inner workings of the Romulans, which I think is hugely impactful to our understanding of their people. And more on that line, we actually get to meet Praetor Shinzon, who of course is a clone of Captain Jean-Luc Picard, but we're not even going to talk about that particular subplot point because that's a little weird. But the point that I'm bringing here is the fact that we understand a little bit more about, again, who leads the Romulans. We've dealt with the Tal Shiar, we've dealt with the Romulan Imperial Navy, we've dealt with some secret operatives, we've seen Sela, the long-lost grandchild of, the child of Tasha Yar that was half Romulan. We've seen all that stuff before, but again, we haven't seen who actually, no kidding, really leads the Romulan Star Empire and how that inner working actually functions from a Star Trek perspective. So being able to see and be a part of that, and seeing exactly how a new Praetor came into light, and how immediately the political climate there changes, and how he's interacting with Romulans, and how the fleet still, even though they are helped put him in power, the Romulan Imperial fleet still is acting a certain way towards the political leader of the Romulan Star Empire. So that's really interesting to see that dynamic happen out on screen as well. So another thing we actually get to see is the, of course, first appearance of the Remans. Now, these guys, this is obviously Ron Perlman in makeup, which I think they did a great job with showing off his abilities underneath that prosthetics. But the makeup itself looks cool, their costumes look cool, they're very intimidating on screen, and being able to understand a little bit more about the dynamics between the Romulans and their basically slave species, the Remans, which are so close to them, you begin to understand a bit more about who the Romulans are as a people. These are the first groups of people that the Romulans themselves actually subjugated and conquered, which was their neighbors. And they've been slaves to the Romulans for God knows how long. So being able to see them for the first time, and also see them rise to the top of the Romulan food chain, so to speak, is an amazing feat, not only for them, but for us to also watch and be a part of as well. It really adds to the mythos, I think, of what's going on inside of Star Trek. And final thing on the thing with the Romulans here, I know I'm hopping on the Romulans a lot, but we actually get to see another type of Romulan Warbird. This is obviously the Warbird Valdor, which we see present in a few different styles of ships actually in Star Trek Nemesis, fighting in the end battle with the Enterprise against Shinzon's ship. So these are not to be replacing the D'Deridex. A lot of people thought that this was just a reimagined D'Deridex Warbird that we saw in TNG. This is actually a completely different class of Warbird that's used by kind of the high-tier admiralty in the Romulan Star Empire. So seeing this ship in combat looks beautiful. It's much more agile. It's still got a very strong Romulan feel to it, but it obviously looks very different from a D'Deridex in a lot of different ways, and showcases that the Romulans actually have a wide berth of fleet ships. It's not just, transports and the D'Deridex. There's actually a lot of different ships in their fleet, just like in the Federation. So showcasing this ship and seeing how it actually works in combat, I think help expands out the mythos of who the Romulan people are and what their arsenal truly is, and really just goes to show how little we actually know about the Romulans at this point, because we've never seen this ship before. I don't even think that the crew of the Enterprise has seen this ship before. So again, that's just one of those things where it's like, you really don't know much about these Romulans, and we're barely getting a glimpse inside of their Imperial structure, because essentially the entire Empire is falling apart at this point. So that's a really cool thing that we actually get to see another glimpse into the Romulan culture. One other thing that was kind of a fun little Easter egg that they threw in during the wedding scene of Ryker and Troy was actually Wesley Crusher in a Starfleet mess dress uniform. And you can clearly see from here in this picture, he actually has a single pip of being a ensign inside of Starfleet. So it's very clear that he's actually ended his journey with the Traveler that he left off with in TNG, and has returned to Starfleet and maybe pursuing a career in that path. Now, this is very interesting because, everyone thought that Wesley was done. We weren't going to see his character ever again, and, he would never join Starfleet. But obviously, he decides to come back and actually join Starfleet again. And now it's either from pressures from his mother, pressure from Captain Picard. Maybe he got bored with the Traveler, or maybe he just wanted to live out in his father's footsteps. The man that actually did die, basically before he was born. And maybe kind of, vicariously live through that experience and actually get an opportunity to maybe surpass his own father's rank and to represent the Wesley Crusher family in Starfleet even after his mom retires to Starfleet Medical. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I think it was a great little teaser Easter egg, but again, that's really impactful for us to see what happened to Wesley Crusher. Another one of the big things here, obviously, is Riker and Troy finally getting married, something that has been teased about, talked about, explored heavily in other Star Trek films, and obviously the entire TNG saga. So seeing the wedding actually take place is actually a big thing for both of these characters. Now, this may not be affecting the universe as a whole, but this is very impactful for the characters that we see inside of the film for our TNG crew, because essentially Riker's leaving, He's finally married Troy. Picard doesn't have his first officer anymore, and at the end of Nemesis, he's actually also lost Data, so now he's out all of those people, and he's essentially kind of by himself trying to figure his own self out and having to reset his own crew again, because essentially it's just him and Geordi, because Worf isn't stationed there anymore. So it's just him and Geordi on the Enterprise until Geordi decides to leave. So it's actually kind of, you know, a bittersweet end. This is kind of representative of a bittersweet end of the TNG crew that we've come to know and love since the 80s that we've been watching on television. And finally, of course, with the Riker thing, as Riker finally takes command of the USS Titan. He even does this right at the end of the film, and he goes off and finally becomes a captain, and he brings Deanna Troi with him to become a counselor of that ship. Now, why is this important? Well, this isn't a lore video about what happens with the USS Titan, but Riker taking over the captain's chair, which I actually did a video about what happens to Riker after Nemesis already. When he takes that captain's chair, he does a lot of impactful things with first contact missions. He actually almost loses Deanna Troi in a couple of different skirmishes, and he gets appointed as one of the, you know, Starfleet Intelligence Security commissioners, and actually investigates and roots out corruption inside of Starfleet. And that's all because of his role on side of the USS Titan that he actually gets to take place in all of those things. So him taking part of the USS Titan obviously is a huge impactful thing for the entire Star Trek franchise, and not something to be taken lightly. Anyways, guys and gals, that's my feelings about why I feel Star Trek Nemesis is the most impactful film inside of the Star Trek universe. You know, when you look at anything ranging from the motion picture all the way up to Star Trek Behind, most of the character stuff that happens is very small base. It's very linear. It's very tightly fit together. I would say the only two films that even come close to the amount of impact for Star Trek as a whole is actually going to be Undiscovered Country, where they obviously do a treaty with the Klingons during that time. Kirk gets framed for murder, and we understand a little bit more about the Klingon High Command, and we do a treaty with the Klingons. And then, of course, Star Trek 2009, where we actually lose Vulcan to a red matter black hole device. Those two have very big impacts on the Star Trek universe as a whole for their respective, inputs. But I do believe that Star Trek Nemesis, by and large, has the most amount of impact for the entire Star Trek universe. I hope that you guys and gals like this video. Please throw a comment up below. Let me know how you guys feel about Star Trek Nemesis, and if you guys feel like I do, that it's very impactful to the Star Trek multiverse, or do you guys feel like it's the worst movie ever and I'm off my rocker and this movie actually totally sucks and I should stop huffing the shisha? But I'm curious to hear what you guys and gals think about it. Please throw a like and a subscribe up on YouTube. Please follow me on Twitter at RealKetwolski, and follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/RealKetwolski. And I will see everybody next time. Live long and prosper, my Trekkies! The next thing that we find out is actually the realization that Khan Noonien Singh, that's who I was going to say,